Welcome back to Comic Krackle. I'm your host, Kirby, and you're watching Motherbox News. One additional thing before we jump into this episode, I just announced it on the Luke Cage video, but I opened up a Patreon for the channel. If you're interested in getting these videos early, the community Discord that's now live, or having your name show up at the end of each video, consider subscribing to the Patreon for as low as $1 per month. And now, back to Motherbox News. Today we're going to be talking about The New Gods, Issue 3 by Ram V Evan Cagle and Riccardo Federici. Before we jump into the issue, I want to cut to a community question asked on Twitter by Moon Knight Dude, who says, the fourth world stuff can be complex. Lots of characters, deep themes, and really out there powers and concepts. What was Ram V's research process like? Besides just reading, I'm curious what his writing process is like for characters that have such a deep history. And now, why don't we cut over to Ram V to answer this question? Ram?
Honestly, there wasn't a lot of research involved, beyond reading Kirby's Fourth World and Simonson's Orion. I'm well versed with stories and mythologies from around the world as a matter of interest, and have been for a while, so writing and drawing from that well never felt like anything beyond reaching into influences. It never felt like research. As for writing characters with history, my tendency is to move characters forward, and so my narrative efforts are usually focused to that end. I do appreciate a character's history, but I only tend to pick from it things that I feel will help me move characters forward or demonstrate their development through dramatic means. History in itself, when it comes to fictional characters, unless it becomes part of that propulsive element of telling the story in the here and now, it's either baggage you don't need, or at its worst, a nostalgia ball and chain that keeps characters from moving forward.
Thanks, Ram. Alright, let's get into the issue. In issue 3, we start off with the new antagonist, Karok Ator. This is of course picking up off of the cliffhanger in issue 2, where he's starting his assault on Apokolips. While the first page actually serves as a continuation from the end of issue 2, it's the second page that I really want you to focus on. I don't know how many times I have to say this, but this page by Evan Cagle is absolutely amazing. And it's actually not the first time that I'm going to be saying this in this video alone. This 2-page spread actually depicts Karok Ator against Mantis, who's been a longtime antagonist working for Darkseid. In the foreground and the background, you can see these Lovecraftian monsters fighting what looks like the same forces that come from Karok Ator's army. What I wanted to highlight is just how these pencils are portrayed, having Karok Ator and Mantis almost pop off of the page, with the background forces actually being in the foreground as well as the background. There's this kind of tangible texture when looking at this page that I absolutely adored. In the next page, we see a conversation between Metron and somebody that you might not be familiar with already. His name is the Chronicler, and because he wouldn't stop asking me, here's Kirby, our lore correspondent, to tell you who that is. Thanks, Kirby. Hi, I'm Kirby, lore correspondent. Okay, so the Chronicler was actually created recently. It was within a tie-in book for Dark Knight's death metal titled Death Metal Rise of the New God. This was written by James Tynion IV with art by Jesus Marino. So we need to differentiate Metron and the Chronicler. Metron is the god of information, while the Chronicler basically just chronicles all of the events for the fourth world. So Metron is a lot closer to a Loki archetype, and Chronicler is just there to make sure that all of the history is written. Anyways, that was it. Back to you, Kirby. Thanks, Kirby. Anyways, the majority of this issue is told through the narration from the Chronicler, depicting the origins of the fourth world. Alongside this narration, we're also introduced to gods that predated the new gods. So some would say that they're old gods. These 3 gods would all be siblings, named Arbor Strutta, Parzarum, and Niktar. Something that I really love is the inclusion of the Ragnarok. Obviously, it's spelt different, see here, but I personally felt like it was a good inclusion, kind of getting away from the Norse mythology aspect and making the fourth world have its own mythology. It's also pretty interesting that Death of Gods would mean Ragnarok, no matter the mythology that it comes from. It's almost like a universal term, or one would say multiversal. The first of these siblings is Arbor Strutta, who's described as being benevolent and the god of nomads and drifters. She would be known for her eternal kindness. She would take on the people that had no place to go, accepting them as one of her own and into her family. The next of the siblings and the youngest of the gods is Niktar. He's explained to be the god of pathfinders and explorers, the god of the unknown and the shrouded, of eternal frontiers. He was a god that was known to be ingenious and undeterred, ambitious and without fear. His followers would go on to be explorers, finding unfound lands. The majority of the knowledge that we know of the multiverse is due to him and his followers. And the last of the siblings is the middle brother, Parzarum, who's stated to be the god of implements, invention, and industry. He's described as being the maker's hand and the one who knows the inner workings of things. His followers would be described as the tinkerers, the toilers, the smiths, the theorists, the numberers, and the ponderers. So now we have the setup for all three of these gods and what these followers looked like. The narration from the Chronicler depicts these gods and saying that the second world was at an end. And I guess earlier wasn't enough, so now let's cut over to the lore correspondent, Kirby. I'm back. Okay, so if we're going to talk about the fourth world and what that means, it's kind of difficult. Mark Evanier talked about Jack Kirby's intentions for the meaning of the fourth world by stating, I can give you about 11 answers to this, and if you'd asked Jack 8 times, you'd have 8 more. Lynn Wein, who worked at DC at the time, says it was a cover blurb intended to only appear on the covers of the 4th issues. It referred to the fact that every issue of a Kirby comic was like a world unto itself, ergo, each number 4 was a 4th world. Folks then adapted it to refer to the whole epic that flowed betwixt Jack's books. Meanwhile, Steve Sherman, who worked with me as Jack's assistant at the time, recalls Jack coming up with a variation on the term the third world, as used in socio-economic context. It was Jack's way of transcending that term, as Jack transcended everything. Apparently, Jack also told a few folks that he considered the material his 4th universe in comics. The Marvel books would have been Kirby's third world, and I've never quite gotten clear what the first 2 were. There are other answers even less credible. Personally, I buy none of them. I don't think there was any logic behind it, at least when Jack first used it. I think it was just a term that popped into his head and he liked the sound of it. Later on, he came up with several different retroactive explanations. Additionally, people have gone on to retcon the idea of the 4th world to basically be the final step in the evolution of gods. And what I mean by this is that there was the original world, so the first world. Then once they reached godhood, it's the second world. Once Ragnarok hit, it destroyed God world, sending out a god wave, basically being the inception of superheroes. So that would be the third world. And with the reformation of both New Genesis and Apokolips, they are the 4th world. There has been speculation and talk about a 5th world, specifically by Dan DiDio and Grant Morrison during the times of the aftermath of the death of the New Gods, but I don't think that it actually manifested into anything. Anyways, that's enough out of me. Back to Kirby. Thanks. Anyways, the narrative then goes on to show that Parzarum, one of the 3 siblings, is the one who built the island ships of Colon. It's explained that Parzarum and his followers are the ones that really made the technological advancements for this second world. On top of that, it's explained that he and his followers were the ones that built the first wandering planet, then named after him. As the story of the siblings progresses, it shows that Niktar and his pathfinders traveled all throughout the universe, even to the points where the light of the source was just an echo. During their travels, they found this distant planet, one that only had the remnants of a dwindled civilization, but as the narration says, long gone, but one that had left behind an unusual source of power, a living blackness, driven by an intelligence unlike any they had seen, a primordial argument against all existence. Niktar and his people were overcome and possessed by this parasitic darkness, warped and turned from the light by its malice and ploys. So they found something outside of the normal universe, and it corrupted them. Niktar would then return and kill his sister. After the betrayal, he then eats his sister's flesh and says that he's no longer the god of explorers, and instead he says that he's the god of scavengers and purgers. Niktar then goes to his brother, asking him to build machines of war and conquest and pain, but his brother declines. And if the nice older sister was killed and then eaten, his brother is going to get a similar fate. Instead of putting him in chains, they bound his hands in metal to the ground. Now for the rest of his life, he's unable to do his own purpose. But the good news is Parzarim had actually already saw this coming, but we're gonna get into that in a minute. Moving forward with the story, we then catch up with Mr. Miracle, Big Barda, and Olivia live free. They're shown to be in the middle of this conversation with a character that's actually known within Mr. Miracle mythology. His name, Oberon. Oberon was introduced in the first Mr. Miracle series by Jack Kirby. He's depicted in that series as this very small guy, but looking very similar to Jack Kirby. Anyways, he's basically like the right-hand man for Mr. Miracle. Oberon then goes on to talk about how he knew that Scott was going to be a part of this prophecy even before he knew it. He says that he knew that the mundanity of suburban life would not work for Scott, and at the end of the day, he's still the universe's greatest escape artist. Of course, Barda takes issue with that because it's basically just distilling her to a ball and chain that Scott has to escape from. But Oberon didn't mean it. Oberon then goes on to show the Escapatron, which was created originally to get Scott out of the escapes that he wasn't able to escape from in that moment, but it never actually worked that way. Instead, you can lock onto a source signature and zap you there. So this is how Scott and Barda are actually going to find the new god, Kamal. It's then that Oberon says that he's going along with them because he's going to be the one that takes care of Liv. So no baby Bjorn after all. Unless Oberon gets one. That might look rad. Alright, remember whenever I was talking about the backup plan that one of the gods had set? We're there now. Parzarim had made his backup plan twofold. They're depicted to be these rockets that travel outside of the traveling world, one named Motor and the other Pater. It's shown that the traveling world blew up and Motor went towards the gravitational fallout, later leading to becoming New Genesis. But Pater drifted. It was guided by Parzarim's search for peace, exploring these cosmos and trying to find a sustainable planet that it would be the most help. And it's shown to be landing on Earth in the time of the cavemen. The narration states, he was Prometheus, who brought the fire to the mortals. He was Daius, who taught them to map the sky. Pitamaha, who taught them of tools and implements, of the making of the inner workings of things. They knew him by many names, and he took on many faces, and yet all of them alike the father of the world. So for all of you book nerds, this is Chariot of the Gods. And it's not just this issue that's heavily influenced by Chariot of the Gods, but the majority of Jack Kirby's work. So I reached out to Ram V to ask him about why he thinks that Chariot of the Gods has influenced so much of superhero stories. And additionally, I asked him what he thinks that humanity can learn from this story. And he said,
It's one of those deep-seated existential questions, isn't it? Where did we come from? Who made us? And we seek to answer these questions in everything we do, really. Science, philosophy, art, storytelling. I think Chariot of the Gods and other theories of that ilk have such staying power, and they permeate through storytelling because they provide one such framework in which we seek to imagine and explain our own existence and growth and time on this planet. And if you think about it, the grand mythologies of the world do this too. Even the ones that form the basis of contemporary religions start off only trying to explain, who are we? How did we get here? It made immediate sense to me that Kirby used it in context of his epic that combined mythopoetics and sci-fi epic storytelling, and when I saw the connections I could make, I used it too.
Moving on, the narrative showcases the life of this god on Earth, but he has one question. What happens when he dies? The narration states, each time he considered this was with great excitement. He was also overcome with fear. In contemplation, he would often walk to the pinnacle of his creation and wonder, what will they do when I'm gone? I am ready, but do I leave them able to fend for themselves? What if, after all this time, the Niktari come upon this place? Will my children survive? So he goes on to break his vow, and he must create a weapon, one that's able to grow and adapt and evolve. And the narration describes the formation of this weapon by stating, he shaped it so it would move unnoticed among his favored people. He gave it a mind and a body, unshakable, unbreakable, and to power it, he poured his final breath into its lungs, tethering it forever to the source. In time, if they ever needed him, he would rise among them. A god, a new god. The page then goes on to showcase how this god was discovered by man, showing that it's in a temple in India. So Kamal, the new god, is the weapon created by Peter. Kamal is the antithesis of the Niktari. So that means that Kamal is the new god, created by the old gods to fight the old gods. Are you keeping up with me? We then cut back to Apokolips with Karok Ator dethroning Mantis and showing that all of the other leaders of Apokolips are trying to escape, specifically Granny Goodness, Darkseid, and the rest of the female Furies. It ends with Karok stating that he's going after New Genesis next, and they're going to take it. It's then that we pick back up with Kamal and his family, showing that they're being tailed by Maxwell Lord's death squad. Over their radio, Lord says, do what you have to, but bring me that child. And the squad sends over an RPG. Hey guys, it's a little bit overkill, don't you think? And at that point, Mr. Miracle appears on top of the car, deflecting this RPG, and then stating, oh, you boys are gonna be in so much trouble, with Big Barda then stopping the car in their tracks, basically making it crumple in on itself. And let me tell you, Ram sent this page to me very early in the process, and I was just enamored by it. I just can't believe the level of artistic decisions that went into this page to show that this car was like crumpling in and all of the people that were flying off. It shows this level of motivation behind these pencils to show all of the momentum of that car and how Barda is an unstoppable force. And this is where we leave off. So don't forget to go and pick up issue 4 March 19th, and I'll see you guys next time. Whoa. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Motherbox News. I wanted to extend a special thank you to the early adopters of the Patreon, specifically Lord Edge, Jared Bird, Gianni Palumbo, and Owen Likes Comics. If you're interested in signing up for the Patreon, that's going to be linked in the comments down below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And as always, trust in the source.